Hello and welcome everyone to this FBH webinar, Family Business Histories webinar. It's a great pleasure for us to welcome you all here. It's a special day for us, so we're delighted that you're celebrating the launch of our Spotlight series with us. My name is Farida El-Agami. I'm the General Manager of the Tharawat Family Business Forum and the Co-Director of Family Business Histories, together with Martin Klimke. And Martin and I will be hosting today's session and moderating the conversation later on. Of course, even though we're all very much used to these Zoom calls by now, if you do have a question, please feel free to put it in either the chat or in the Q&A. We would like to very much encourage everyone to be involved in the conversation. We know that everybody who's attending today has a specific interest or a special expertise on the topic, so we'd love to hear from you, so feel free to make use of those interactive features. If you have any issues, please feel free to contact our team, and of course, you feel free to customize and modify the screen to your liking. So before we get started, I'd like to take 2 or 3 minutes just to introduce, for those of you who have joined us for the first time for this session, for a family business history session, to kind of give you a bit of background about this project. This project is really a collaboration that has been ongoing for the last 6 years now, and it's a collaboration between the Tharawat Family Business Forum and NYU Abu Dhabi. And it's a really special collaboration that's very close to our hearts, because it really brings together both a deep academic understanding of the subject, as well as a practical perspective through Tharawat from the private sector. So what is really the purpose and what is the vision of the Family Business Histories project? The Family Business Histories project was really born out of a need to have a better and more in-depth understanding of the historical significance and impact of family enterprises in the MENA and MENASA region. And so our project really compiles, documents, and analyzes the history and legacy of family enterprises, and through that looks at the socio-economic impact of family businesses in the region, both from a macroeconomic perspective, from a historical perspective, but we also look at kind of the individual significance of families in specific sectors and segments. So we are really here today, and it's truly a pleasure, as I said when I opened, because this is really the culmination for our project of more than a year of work behind the scenes with a lot of researchers to launch this Spotlight series. And it's truly a pleasure for us to share the outcome of this work with you today. So what's going to happen is we have a host of fantastic speakers with us today that are going to run you through the background of this part of the project, of our Spotlight series, that are going to explain to you a little bit more about how it came to be. And then we will have a panel discussion with 2 fabulous speakers who are going to contextualize for us the significance of this, this piece of our project. So very briefly, to introduce all our speakers, we have, of course, Isra Mahboub, who is a research associate at New York University in Abu Dhabi. She is really one of the brains behind the research of this project, together with Shireen El-Agami, who works as manager at innovation and strategy at the Tharawat Family Business Forum. And it's really based on their work that we can launch this part of our research today. So Shireen and Isra, hopefully Isra can join us. Maybe she has a bit of a connection problem, but hopefully both can join us to walk us for about 5 to 10 minutes through the project to explain its build-up, how it has been developed, and then kind of show you a live case study on the website. And then, of course, in our second part of the webinar, we have Rania Labaki, professor at EdTech Business School, and El-Kinawi, communications strategist at True North Consulting and 4th generation family business member, who are going to help us really contextualize the significance of this project. So we thank you for being here. And with this, I will stop sharing and invite Shireen and Isra to come online and introduce our project. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Farida, and thank you for everybody for being here. It's really a pleasure for all of us to have you attending our webinar and the launch of the Spotlight series. Together with my colleague Isra, we will just take a few minutes to share, basically to introduce the Spotlight series to you. So I'll quickly share my screen, and I hope that everybody can also see our slides. If you have any difficulties seeing the slides, of course, you can always notify us in the chat as well. So what Isra and I will do in the next 10 minutes is just give you a short introduction of what are the spotlights, why have we set up the spotlights, and also the methodology behind writing the spotlights. So what are the spotlights? For everybody who is not familiar yet with the Spotlight series or even with Family Business Histories as a project, here just 2 pointers about what the spotlights are. The spotlights are a growing collection of currently 60 profiles, each documenting the history of a regional family business. We'll go into more detail once we share the live page with you as well. Each of these profiles really provides insights into the founders' backgrounds, the business founding story, and key business milestones of the business operations over time. For everybody who knows our project and who's familiar with what we have produced so far with our case studies and also the activities that we have been talking about in our FBH project, you know by now that really for us, the main focus in our research project is to focus on the founder's journey and what the entrepreneurial circumstances were back in the day when these companies were created. Two general notes as well of the creation of the Spotlight series are that our research team has been working over the last 18 months to produce these 60 profiles. And we're very happy to announce as well that in the next few months, we will also be able to launch the spotlights in Arabic, which of course then will make sure that many more people across the region will have access to benefit from the content and the research that we have done at FBH. So maybe just to add here for context, why did we start the Spotlight series and why are they so important for the industry or the community that researches and talks about family businesses and their history? With the Spotlight series, of course, we have now also a real opportunity to have a quantitative approach to map the impact of family businesses across the region and their impact across the economy, society, and culture in our various countries. We have done the same, of course, with the case studies that we have published so far. But again, for the first time, we also here have a quantitative approach of mapping that impact. Furthermore, of course, we contribute to documentation of the rich and complex histories of family enterprises across the region. This is important for various reasons, but one reason, of course, that is very obvious is also that we preserve the legacy and we preserve the information and sources that we have about family enterprises from back in the day. Furthermore, this is the first time that regional research taps into untapped local, regional, and international resources in this context. Isra will comment a bit more about the actual research steps on writing these profiles, but we were very keen as a regional research project to make sure that we include all kinds of resources that are available locally in the various countries in the MENASA, as well as regionally and international archives that Isra will also highlight later. Furthermore, one part, of course, that we were very ambitious about is that we create a knowledge platform for our various stakeholders. With that, we mean with the Spotlight series now, we really have achieved to create a platform where stakeholders like the academic community, students, but as well as family business leaders and next gens are really able to benefit from the content that we have published and that we continue to grow, of course, in the next few months and years. And benefit for their own perspective, whether it's for research, for legacy preservation, for inspiration. And so we're very proud that basically we are going in the right direction with this. So my colleague Isra will just share now quickly some pointers regarding the methodology behind writing these spotlights. So Isra, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Shireen, for the wonderful overview of the Spotlight series. So I guess now that we know a little bit and we understand a little bit what the setup of this project is and the Spotlight series in particular, maybe I can just give you quick pointers on basically the process of how this all came together over the past 18 months where we have been conducting continuous research. So naturally, on the onset of the project, when we started sort of like deciding which families that we were going to cover, et cetera, the natural question that arose at the beginning was, which family businesses qualify, right? So if you're familiar at all with the sort of academic literature that exists around the definitions of family businesses, or more largely the definitions of anything really, then it's quite complex. There's usually like an extensive body of literature that exists around what constitutes a family business, what criteria go into defining what a family business is, et cetera. And for us, we really had to study this thoroughly in order to come up with criteria that best apply to our project, to the scope of our research. And eventually we decided to actually consider 3 criteria, beginning with ownership. So we are only covering family businesses that are where the family is the majority stakeholder. Of course, some academic literature would go into specific percentages and things like that. And we can talk about this in so much detail, but I think for the sake of time, we basically just had to go with the idea that the family had to be the majority shareholder in the ownership of the family businesses we're covering. The second criterion that we looked at was the management. So we are only looking at family businesses where the family members themselves hold are actively involved in the management, more broadly speaking. So that involves basically families where the family members, second or third generations, for instance, hold leadership positions and are actually actively involved in running the business operations. The third one was succession. So being a history project, of course, naturally we had to look sort of at, family businesses that do have have operated for a certain span of time. So the temporal element of this was very important. So we decided to go with family businesses where the current family is being run by at least second generation. And in a lot of cases, we went with families that are being run by third or fourth whenever we could. But for some countries, for some contexts, this was, of course, a second generation was sort of the decisive criteria. So then the second thing that I would also wanted to talk about was perhaps the sources that we looked at, right? So the research process itself and sort of where did we get all of this information, right? So the vast majority of this, of the process really was based on desk research and archival research. But some of of course, there is like a variety of, sources that we looked at that could not be really covered in a list because it's so diverse. But I think the main 4 sources that we can talk about today would be probably academic literature as a starting point. So we sort of scanned the academic literature for any mentions of the specific family business that we're looking at. Sometimes those are books that are written about the families, papers that are written about the family business in question, or even just merely certain mentions in certain academic reports, papers that are quantitative, that have quantitative samples, right, a quantitative methodology to them. And there's like a brief mention of a certain case study. So basically scanning the academic literature to make sure that we're capturing as much of that as we could. And then the second thing is what I would refer to as a corporate history profile. So that's essentially is anything from the official sources, official websites. On a lot of family businesses, you would find a tab called About Us or Our History or Our Timeline, right? And that typically goes into sort of the key milestones from, of course, the family business's perspective itself of, how they want to sort of portray their own narrative. So we looked into that. We looked into LinkedIn pages or any other sort of social media, official social media that came from the family business itself. And whenever they dove sort of into the history, that is something we captured. But also we did look into a lot of online databases that will cover a lot of data points about the history or sort of the historical operations of family businesses. Then the third thing that I would say was very recurrent as a source of information was a press coverage review. So that essentially goes into the press, how those family businesses that we were looking at were covered in the press from a historical perspective. that tended to provide sort of a very different angle of insight into the research, because typically what you would find in the press would either be, something that is really encapsulates the human element. So it's very focused on one specific member, for instance, who had an interesting story, or, who went through sort of a turbulent time, and that was covered in the press for various reasons. Or then they would go into sort of embedding the operations in larger economic and sort of political events that happened in a given country. The fourth source that I also wanted to highlight, is also my personal favorite, would be archival research. So digging into archives as much as possible in order to capture really any mention of the family business in question. So for that, we had to do a lot of digging, because obviously that requires lots of languages, lots of sort of keywords and different spellings, also finding actually archives that would go into covering our research scope. So then we really captured anything from letters to, anything from letters to like, probably even things like legal archives, where there are court cases, letters, images, visuals, etc. Right, and then putting all of that together, sort of producing the case studies, then we can, I think, move on to the research results of what that produced. So now we have, as Shireen mentioned earlier, 60 profiles, so 60 case studies that are currently covered on our portal. They are from 30 countries, I would say even more than 30 countries, which was really important for us to sort of do a span of our geographical scope. And then over 1,600 sources that we looked into and that are currently sort of stored in our bibliography for the Spotlight series. I would say it's even way more than that, to be honest, because we did look into a variety of sources that we didn't end up probably mentioning or sort of making it into the bibliography. Then we also found lots of archival images, some of which you might see on our website on the portal, which we will share with you in a minute, but also a lot of that we have at our disposal. The oldest founding year that we covered was 1830, which is Ben Kaudi from Lebanon, which is a fascinating story that we have covered on the portal. Now, maybe I can already show you a bit of the actual portal. So I'm going to share my screen with the portal so you can just have a look at how it looks. Right, so you can just go to familybusinesshistories.org/spotlights, and this is sort of the landing page where we have all the 60 cases covered. You can scroll here to see more pages. And of course, we have a feedback form as well if you ever want to share any insights with us. So I think that here as well, we have those filters, which essentially just allow you to filter through the 60 cases based on region or based on the family business name, which you can look up, or based on the founding year. Right, so to show you one of our articles, for instance, this is what a spotlight or an article would look like. So this is Isa Al-Gurg, right, a group, which is a family business that I'm sure you're familiar with. So quickly, we cover a snapshot comparing essentially some of the data points from the founding stage to today. And then we go into the article itself, which covers the milestones of the story, beginning with a biographical background on the founder, the growth phase, essentially the key milestones of the business, and then where the family business is today. Now, the most important thing that I would like to highlight, because it really took a lot of work, was the notes. So you have access to all the footnotes and all the sources that we have used in each article, which I think is really a tremendous contribution of our project, if I might say so myself, to sort of academic literature, because we really struggled a lot with the idea of sources. So this is why it was very important for us to link the sources here so that people can know where we got each piece of information from. And with that, I think I will hand it over again to Shireen. So I'll just
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Isra, for sharing these insights. And of course, Isra and I are happy to also answer any questions in the chat. However, we'll hand over now to Farida and Martin, and also to the next session, our panel discussion with our dear guests today. And our colleague Rodilu will keep sharing also the link to the website for our participants. So thank you so much for everybody's attention.
Thank you very much, Isra and Shireen. It's really, truly, I find, even though I'm part of the project, every time I look at it, I'm quite impressed, and I'm very happy that we were able to, compile this body of work from really a variety of quite complex sources, and also to share it slowly with our community. We see really the reaction of family business owners and the ecosystem that really start realizing how valuable this could be going forward for inspiration, for information, and even for research, for further research. So thank you so much for to both of you. And also, please, let's thank all the students who have participated in creating all of that work. I think, we had about 10 or 12 students from NYU Abu Dhabi who worked on this project with us to make sure that we were able to capture this volume of work. So thank you so much to them as well. So I'd like to welcome Martin Klimke, professor at NYU Abu Dhabi. Welcome, Martin. Of course, Martin is the co-director of our project, and together we have the privilege of guiding you through the following 40 minutes of conversation. And I'd like to invite El-Kinawi and Professor Rania Labaki to come online and to join us for this conversation. Again, I'd like to encourage everyone on the call to comment. We already got some interesting conversations in the chat. Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. Even if you have questions to the research team, they're still around, so we can magically bring them back. So feel free to ask us if you have anything that intrigues you. But for now, welcome May, welcome Rania. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you, Farida. Great to be here.
Of course. So we'll go into a conversation, and again, hopefully everybody will be free to participate in this conversation. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you so much, Farida. I'm very, very happy to be here. And I think this is, the culmination point, of a long journey. And, I fully second anything and everything that Farida said, commending to the team, all the students, but really also Shireen and Isra for taking the leadership on this and getting us to where we are. I think it's a milestone. And, I can already see that faculty at NYU Abu Dhabi are eager to absorb, this work into their curriculum and their teaching. So this is wonderful. And the news will spread even wider and wider, which is why I'm so happy to have Professor Labaki and El-Kinawi here, because I'm really curious about your impressions when you first saw the website and these case studies. What were you thinking? What were your sort of spontaneous ideas when you encountered this for the very first time? Whoever would like to start first.
I can start. At first sight, I felt very emotional by browsing family business cases, given that some of those cases had rocked my childhood. I'm originally from Lebanon, and seeing those businesses come alive through the website was very, very interesting to me. In addition, as you know, these are like much needed and long-awaited efforts in the Arab world. The family business field has been growing very fast, exponentially, and showcasing these businesses is really part of the movement, finally, and reflects growing enthusiasm of the community on this topic.
Great, thank you, May.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely inspirational to look at 60 family businesses from our region, documented, easy to find, so clear. I love the imagery. I love the layout. Farida knows I'm all for that. But it's a milestone, as Professor Rania said. We haven't had the opportunity to have this compilation before, covering family businesses in our region. And I think it's a huge step for the knowledge in this space, and just absolutely inspirational.
Thank you so much. I think, you know, building off what you both said, the question that comes to mind, perhaps Rania, to you initially, you know, from an academic perspective, and you've researched family businesses around the world. You have an extensive. I can really recommend anyone interested in family business who has not read Rania's work, you know, to really do so, because it's impressive and really deep. And I'd love to know from that perspective, how do you contextualize this project and kind of the outcomes of this project here?
So I invite you to step back in time with me to be able to do the contextualization. So in the Arab world, basically, research is currently on the rise, but this enthusiasm dates back to only a few years ago, whereas the field of family business has been developing since 5 decades ago with a focus on the Western world. So I could witness since around 10 years now, I know that your project is around 6 years, you know, there has been lots of initiatives related to academic and practice-oriented organizations, some also chairs and research centers developing the Arab world, but slowly, right? Slowly but surely, as we see also. So actually, the very first international conference, academic conference, was held in Sharjah a few years ago with the support of Tarawat, actually, and I had the privilege to be an opening keynote. And since then, we had a special issue at one of the main academic journals in family business called Journal of Family Business Strategies on family businesses in the Arab world. So since, you know, research has been developing, but as you know, research left alone is not enough. We need really to have research feeding the educational programs, feeding the best practices of advisors and other stakeholders connected with family businesses, and translating this research in a language that everybody can understand. And this is where the power of the Family Business History Spotlight Series lie. You know, through comprehensive case studies, we are able to bridge academia, and pedagogy, and also contribute to mapping family businesses in the region and understand them and what is unique about them, because family businesses are not homogeneous, right? And more recently, if we look at the context in which we are evolving, you know, we had COVID pandemic, we have war, geopolitical instabilities, climate change. So these are many challenges that businesses face and show how important it is to build resilience. And we know from research that family businesses are well known for their resilience, and some of them, you know, span many generations. So we have a lot to learn from them. So this initiative is also about introducing history into the field of family business. And this is also new, but very promising. Back in 2018, I co-organized at my school at EDEC a conference, which was the first of its kind, bringing family businesses, researchers and historians to talk about family business, history, and emotions. And now we can see there are special issues dealing with the topic, more and more articles. So also your series is surfing on this trend, and it is much needed to bridge those different disciplines together.
Well, thank you so much. I want to sort of go into another direction, because one of the hallmark features of our project is obviously trying to bridge, you know, the academy and, you know, the practitioners, the private sector. And May, you've been, you know, observing our efforts and have been a great friend of our project over the years. And you yourself are not only an expert in corporate communication, but you're also a family business member yourself. What do you think is this project adding for the private sector in our region?
Thank you, Martin. It's adding a tremendous amount of practical linkage that leverages the history and takes it outside the world of academia. So we're not only doing this because you know, academics need it, or so that we can have proper referencing. But when you take this history and actually put it into practice, as I've seen some family businesses do and others not do, it actually helps with the growth of this organization. So one family business that I've worked for more than 13 years, and that operated in more than 100 countries, actually made this part and parcel of their corporate culture. And what this meant was that the then 65,000 employees in the organization who weren't family business members behaved towards this organization as family business owners. And that drove the success and growth of this particular multinational. So putting what you do with the histories that you document is very, very important and is still very relevant in today's world, outside the academic world. So I think it adds a lot of value. It adds to the practice element, putting it in practice, and also to this new world of how to be an entrepreneur and what changes with society and what can you keep and learn from history.
I love that point. Thank you so much, May, for kind of making that segue, because I'd like to open up the conversation a little bit and perhaps start a bit of a debate, between all of us and everybody who's listening, about, how do we deal with our history? So obviously dealing with family history is emotional. Dealing with corporate history, depending on what our corporation has gone through, can be an emotional endeavor. And I think the question really is, it seems to us, so after 6 years on this project, it really feels like history in this region is a complex matter. We deal with it in very different ways. We are educated about history in very different ways. And I think that greatly influences how we individually deal with our own history and our family business history as an extension of that. So perhaps to kick off the conversation here, Rania and May, what have you observed when dealing with family businesses in the region, how they were able or not able perhaps to deal with their own history? Go ahead, Rania. You were smiling more than May.
Yes.
I think we really bring experiences based on real examples. Based on the research, mainly, what I can see is that the relationship between family business and history is complex, especially in the region, because history is imbued with emotions. Let's not forget that. The family is the place where emotions are born, emotions are learned, and you can imagine that in a family business where there is always interaction between a family and a business, those emotions are flowing all the time. So thinking about history leads me to think about what triggers history to be written or shared in a family business. And I can observe that oftentimes it's triggered because there's an anniversary, there's a milestone to celebrate, but sometimes there are change events which push family members to dig into the past and write their history. These change events could be sometimes traumatic, like the death of the founder, for example, or of a key family business member, but it could be also strategic, like a merger acquisition, entry or exit in a market, which requires the family to tell the story to new stakeholders. And also it's about change relative to crisis. We know in the recent crisis, the COVID one, that many families looked into their history and tried to reassure their employees by saying, we had issues in the past, we had very, tough crises in the past, and we managed to go through them. So don't panic, and keep your commitment, and we'll get over it. So all these different events and actions take place because of changes, and history makes sense. Now, it depends also on who's initiating this. Mm-hmm. Is it a senior member who's initiating this because he or she wants to be remembered? Or is it a junior member, or like the potential successor of the business, who wants really to get a hold of the past to be able to better lead the business in the future?
Absolutely.
So many questions are out there to be considered, but to sum it up in a nutshell, there is really sometimes a desire of the family to perpetuate the business over generations. So history is really about ensuring that the legacy will survive and thrive for the generations to come.
Absolutely. That's very interesting. I think I'd love to hear from your perspective, May. And if you put on your family business member hat, right? How does that emotionality sound to you? So you've both worked for family businesses, and you are from a family business. So how does that kind of dealing with the history, how does that ring to you as actually someone who has that in her family?
It's absolutely spot on. It's 100% true. Dealing with the emotions of it is great, and it's I think I would coin it to two key emotions. There's fear and there's trust. So the fear element comes from the fear of divulging our family secrets or our family, good, bad, and ugly. If we dig into the past, what will come out and how will it make us and our parents and our grandparents look like? And what would it say about their decision-making process? So this fear element, I believe, from my own family and from other family businesses I've spoken to, makes you want to protect it. So it's better not, let's leave the past in the past. Let's not talk about it. Right. And the counter of that is trust. Is trusting the partner that will help you in documenting this story. It's trusting the partner that will help you in communicating the story, and trusting the why. As Professor Rania mentioned, it's what triggers documenting the story, is really pinning down why are we doing this and finding the purpose, and then driving that forward. And that purpose is, as you said, the legacy, the growth, the learning. And there's so many ways as communicators. So going on to my communicator hat, you can tell a story and keeping the stories, the people in the story dignified and respecting them. So it's fear and trust, Farida. I think that are the two sides of that coin.
Perhaps before we move on to the next question, we have a question or a comment from the audience in the chat that says that in their opinion, behaving as family business members might actually have a negative impact in today's world, in a world where you have open trade and globalization. And honestly, I want to bring it up here because even though it's not perhaps completely related to what we're discussing, but I think it's a factor that we often encounter when we do family business research, both from a historical perspective, but also from other aspects. And that people kind of look at today's economy and at kind of what this 21st century economy and marketplace looks like, and that we kind of feel like, is it actually an advantage to be a family business? And, what does it look stuffy and old-fashioned and perhaps slow, not innovative to be seen as a family business? So I think maybe Rania, a brief comment on that, and then May, because I just thought I'll pick it up because it keeps coming back, this question, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, family businesses are not homogeneous. So there are also some sad stories on the dark side of some family businesses, right? And that's where negative emotions come into play to bounce back on what May was saying. There is fear, but sometimes there is anger, there is frustration, there are betrayals, lots of, sad stories that reflect rivalries, conflicts within the family. And the idea of writing the history is really to recognize those stories and to learn from them and make sure they're not repeated, to break the patterns. Family businesses are not perfect, but still they are the best capitalism model that have been proven to date in terms of performance, but survival as well. We saw that today, even other large organizations, if I think about the Roundtable, for instance, in the US, they changed their purpose from creating values for shareholders to creating value to all Americans, for instance. So there's this stakeholder approach which has been, put forward increasingly, and we talk a lot about purpose-driven businesses, In France, for instance, we have entreprise à mission, which is a legally structured organization driven towards purpose. And we all know that families who run businesses are all about purpose. So they prove to be the virtuous model, but of course, there are some exceptions. And by writing the history, we can learn from mistakes and bounce back accordingly.
Any thoughts, May, on this point?
So there's a dark side to the media, obviously, and with social media, there's even a darker side, is that most of the time, if we think of it, honestly, what we hear about family businesses are when things go wrong. So it hits the press because it's a crisis, or it's a feud, or they're dissolving the business. So you only really over time have been used to hearing, as a public, as a general public, have been hearing the bad side of family business. So I think it's slightly unfair perception that people have that family businesses have a negative connotation because of what the media has put in front of us. That's the role of sensationalizing media. But on the other side, if you think of family businesses as an organization structure, and that's a lot of the work that I know Farida and the Tharawat team, Tharawat Family Business Forum team, have been doing around governance, around separating ownership from management, around separating, having governance structures, frameworks of operations, that helps the family business operate as a professional business and dissociate itself from the negative connotations that there's nepotism or unfair treatment and all the negativities that come with that. So I think there's the two elements of how do we want to operate as a business, and with this longevity in mind and the purpose in mind, but also being conscious that what we're hearing is by default the negatives because of how media operates. So taking it with a pinch of salt.
No, that's very, very interesting, May. And I think one of the goals, of our project that we try to sort of aim for is obviously to research the past, in an effort to give people the chance to make informed decisions about the present and the future. So let me follow up, maybe also in light of the spotlights, with a more general question. How, in your view, and maybe Rania first and then May, does history, defined as family, but also political, cultural, economic history, influence, in your view, based on your research, corporate culture, and potentially something that May manage, referenced, succession planning, governance in the family businesses?
Well, history influences corporate culture, succession, among others, both in terms of content, but also the way it is shared, to reflect on what May was saying before, how the story has been told and is being told. Based on research, I can tell that the history influences the strategic orientation of family businesses. It can really be a competitive advantage as well to be leveraged. So it is very powerful in that sense, because it's really going to be imbued in the culture of the organization, influencing both the employees, but also the stakeholders around. And from the family side, it influences succession in the sense that it contributes to building the identity of the family, because history is kind of the DNA of the family. So learning about history is also about learning about values, about models of behavior, about secrets as well. So it really helps to structure that identity and also create cohesion among family members. So by telling the story, we bring all the family members together to reflect on their story. And last but not least, it contributes to developing entrepreneurial attitudes among family members, especially the next generation, who would be really sometimes proud of the past and motivated to engage themselves in entrepreneurship. And we know also that families are very entrepreneurial when it comes to, business endeavors over generations. So this is an important part to be maintained and preserved. So globally, a lot of positive impact of history around.
May?
So not much to add on that other than to coin stakeholder engagement. So when you look at all our stakeholders within a business, the entire ecosystem of the environment that an organization works in, the history of the organization or various elements of that history will speak to various different stakeholders. And I often find that businesses find it difficult to coin the message to the different stakeholders that they have. And the easiest way is talking about your history, because by default, each of the shareholders, whether they're a regulator, a government official, your suppliers, your distributors, your consumers, your employees, everybody will find something of interest in that story. So in a way, if you do the pre-work of writing that history and documenting it and sharing it before you hit a crisis or before you have to explain one element of the business, you're already introducing yourself to the world and they have an opinion about you. So I think it's like an intro card of yourself that you can fall back on. And I've seen it in practice help in so many crisis situations where, because people knew the history of this organization, they had leverage, they had an emotional bank account, if you want, with the ecosystem. So it's like you're cashing on it when you need it.
I like that, May, the emotional bank account. I think that's a nice way of putting it. Or perhaps emotional credit to a certain extent. I think, so I got a couple of questions on very different channels. So if you see me going back and forth, that's the reason why. I got a message on WhatsApp actually from someone who's asking, so my grandfather doesn't want to share the story of our family, and he doesn't want to open the books to us as third generation members because he feels that that is the past. And basically, it's done, and we now need to look to the future. What do I do? And I think that that is actually quite a common occurrence. And I wanted to take the opportunity that we have some experts here. So if you're a third generation family business member and you feel that you'd like to know more about the history of your family business, but the people that could provide that don't want to share, what do you do? Maybe Rania, you want to get started?
Well, education is key, and this starts by increasing awareness, inviting that grandfather to listen to this webinar, among others, to read a small piece of paper published in Terawatt or other media sources, to understand how powerful histories can be and how important it is to leverage history and to learn from history can be a good start. I know that it is not an easy endeavor, but the next generation has a lot of responsibility also to show its motivation and to convince. So this is a good place to start.
Great. May, any thoughts from your side?
I'll give you a bit of the personal route that I took, because it's so in my case it was dealing with my great uncles who really didn't understand why I was asking so many questions about the business. It was a bit of a slow burner, so I had to use the emotional bank account I had with them every time we met. And the route I took was asking them very specific questions that would help me learn about the business, but relating it to my current employment, so my current business. And then after I got the knowledge, I would explain that this helped a lot, and see history is helping me with my current role and is helping each of us. And this became a trend that we now do in our family gatherings, where we ask one of them to tell us a story about something in history. So it's not maybe a quick win, it's a bit of a slow burner, but it's speaking to their emotions around why we are asking these questions, and then being very specific about the questions that you're asking, respecting their need of not sharing. So.
Absolutely. Well, that's very interesting. I think it's interesting to see both aspects, right? There is a practical reason why we want to kind of have a historical understanding of the enterprise, but then there's an emotional aspect too, and you kind of have to balance those two elements. There's another question that just came in into our chat, and that links to a conversation a short conversation Martin and I had about, documenting failure. So the comment was, the history should be able to include both successes and failures, and then kind of really aim for transparency, to avoid any misunderstandings. And I think here, we once had a really interesting conversation and a webinar with Professor Andrea from Germany, where of course German companies, based on what happened in the Second World War and their role, have a mandate actually that they have to address and look at historically what has happened in the past. So there might even be contexts where there is actually a need. External need for companies to address what happened in the past. But the question here is also, so what is the purpose of this historical work, right? Because we've kind of spoken a lot about using it for external purposes, but perhaps all that work can mainly also be kept internal, but because it's well done, it does still shape the culture of the family, and of how it communicates its values. So I'd love to maybe start with May on that, and then, end with Rania. So what do you think of the idea of successes and both successes and failures, and then also kind of regulating the access that people have to that documented history?
Yeah, well, Farida, failure for me is one of the biggest teachers in life. And I know that many people feel very awkward and vulnerable about sharing it. And this is, as you said, where we can separate what we share externally versus what we share internally. And it has to do with the culture of the organization. So here I separate it from the family. So I'm very specific. It's not the culture of the family, but it's the culture of the organization in terms of what do we want to share in this learning organization and what do we learn from each of it. It's equally important to document both because you get learnings from successes and failures equally. But I totally understand where families don't want to share business failures externally. And that's where trusting the partner that documents it for you or with you is key. Because then you can say, listen, I'm going to tell you the story because it's important for the history, but then how can we contextualize it so it still is authentic and true, but then it's not put on our website, for example, but it's in our family council. We can share it with generation 3 so that they can learn that when they're setting up this business, they don't do the same mistake, for example. And it also is important when you're talking about failure. I feel that it closely links to the values of the business. So when you are setting up the values, you can talk about or link it back to some of the failures in the early founding years that help shape the business and how it operates.
Well, it's interesting. We think of all the startup issues that we have nowadays.
Exactly.
There's
Somebody
a lot
had told us. I'm sure we would have not made all these mistakes.
Absolutely. Rania, any comments from your side on this?
Well, I mean, there is the business failure, but there are also wrongdoings, which really are part of the history. And the wrongdoings are related very much to emotions. We can see emotions as kind of a red thread today in the webinar. And I had the opportunity to research how the next gens feel when they learn about wrongdoings in the past by their predecessors. And we know that in Germany, because you mentioned that, there are lots of examples of family businesses like Merck, for example, who's, I think 2 generations after what happened during World War II, the next generation apologize and paid reparation to the victims, to the families of the victims, and they had a statue to commemorate all that. So feelings of guilt, for instance, can lead to constructive actions on the part of the next generations to move on. All this to say that failures or wrongdoings, lead to emotions and then into actions. So we can really learn from this and move on accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, I feel we were just getting started, but unfortunately, we're almost at the end of our hour together. And I'd like to invite Shireen and Isra to come back online, because the last question really is a question I'd love to hear everybody's opinion on, and that includes you, Martin. So I'd love to hear from you all. What developments are you hoping to see in the space of the historical analysis of family businesses in our region? So what would you wish for in the coming 5 to 10 years that we can, see as an evolution in this field? And I'll get started with May, then Rania, and then I'll just pick from everybody else.
So for me, two things. I'd like an explosion of spotlights. I want the 60 to be 600 very quickly, because I know we have so many. But I'm also very excited about documenting it in the Arabic language. I think that will be key milestone to take, and I'm excited to see that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, May. Rania.
I think this series is really building the foundations for family business case development at the Arab world, and with the history as a red thread. This being said, I would love to see more cases, but also more in-depth cases with multiple respondent, comparative perspectives, bridging different disciplines, focusing on the family, seen and unseen, events and actions. We talked a lot about history, so to go and dig this information out. So keep the efforts going and involving more stakeholders also in the process.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rania. We're getting the stakeholder hint. Shireen, why don't you give us your thoughts?
Well, definitely, I hope that we can build on including the various stakeholders that Rania also mentioned, and which we are doing already in the project. So definitely for our family business community, I really hope that we can continue creating a healthy relationship with talking about history and normalize it, and continue on also with FBH creating further tools for us as a family business community to build on that and build on the research. And from an academic perspective or regional research perspective as well, I also hope that we can contribute as well that internationally family business histories in our region are understood better, and also will be profiled maybe in a different way as we as a regional research team really do our best to untap the local resources that are here and that have not been considered so far in other research papers. So I really hope that we can build on that further as well.
Thank you, Shireen. Isra?
Yeah, so I think maybe the takeaway actually from the various contributors here today is that perhaps more open participation from family members would be very much appreciated, of course, in the future. And I think part of what we're trying to do with the Spotlight series and with the various research outputs that we are producing here in the project is to showcase what that might look like, and hopefully that sort of provides like an easy intro to certain families who perhaps are not necessarily open to the idea of talking about their histories, when they see families like them from the region, from perhaps even the same countries, or families they recognize, they know they have worked with, who have been documented by the project, that would also give them sort of, the trust to contribute to research in general.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Isra. Martin, any closing words?
Well, I would say three things, enlarging the archival basis in multiple ways. Then secondly, thinking about the ways in which gender, and the dynamic associated to it, plays a role in family business history. And then third and finally, really seeing family business histories as part of a general history, of this part of the world, and bringing it into comparative frameworks to other parts of the world, as Shireen has mentioned. So that's my wish list.
Fantastic. Well, the good news is we still have a lot of work to do. Let's never show this to the students because then they know what's coming. But first of all, let me thank all of you, Rania, May, Isra, Shireen, for being here, for sharing your insights, for sharing the details of this project. I'd also like to thank our attendees who've taken probably their lunch hour to be with us here today and to sharing their comments. I'm sorry if we didn't get to everybody's comments and questions, but we're always happy to be connected. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the project. And we are looking forward to seeing you again very soon for the next webinar series of Family Business Histories. Take care and have a great afternoon. Thank you so much.